Welcome to Mapping Minerals Diplomacy, an explainer series that brings clarity to the deals, players, and policies shaping the global race for critical minerals. I'm your host, Gracelin Baskaran, Director of the Critical Mineral Security Program at CSIS. Today, we spotlight one of the United States' most powerful instruments of minerals diplomacy, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, or PGI. This initiative is building the infrastructure that turns mineral deposits into global supply chains, connecting resource-rich regions directly to world markets. As the G7's flagship program, PGI aims to mobilize $600 billion by 2027 across infrastructure, clean energy, and digital connectivity, with critical minerals at the core. PGI was launched at the 2022 G7's summit in Germany to provide a transparent, high-standard alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. PGI aims to invest $600 billion from G7 plus partners over the course of 5 years in global infrastructure projects. The United States has pledged to mobilize $200 billion of that commitment, combining grants, loans, equity financing, and private investment. While its scope spans energy and digital infrastructure, critical minerals have become a defining focus. In a way, PGI is taking a page out of China's playbook. Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, often called the New Silk Road, is its flagship global infrastructure and investment strategy launched in 2013. It was initially conceived to connect East Asia and Europe through new transport links. The BRI has since expanded into Africa, Latin America, and Oceania, dramatically broadening China's economic and geopolitical reach. Over the past decade, BRI engagement has totaled more than $1.2 trillion, with activity accelerating. In the first half of 2025 alone, deals worth $123 billion were recorded, marking an all-time high. Let's now take a look at some data. Since launching in 2013, 149 countries have joined the Belt and Road Initiative through signing official agreements and memorandums of understanding. Additional countries like Brazil are not official signatories of the BRI, but can still receive investments through it into their energy and transportation infrastructure. Because mining is so energy intensive, it is unsurprising that the energy sector has been a central focus of the Belt and Road Initiative. Since 2013, energy has attracted the largest share of total BRI investment. More than 1/3 of China's new energy financing has flowed to Asia, with another 20% directed to the Americas and 15% to Africa. Much of this funding has gone to resource-rich nations where expanding power capacity directly supports mining operations. Aligning energy investments with mineral-rich geographies is a deliberate strategy reflecting the critical role of affordable, reliable energy in sustaining mining growth. As this graph shows, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, Malaysia are some of the resource-rich jurisdictions that have seen a surge in Chinese energy investments. Similarly, when looking at the top destinations receiving the greatest energy investment, 7 of the 10 of these jurisdictions are in countries with the potential to significantly expand their mining capacity. Mining is the second largest destination for Belt and Road investment, with China channeling nearly $96 billion into the mining and metals sector since 2013. In 2024, investment hit a record $12.6 billion, and more than half of these were concentrated in just 4 countries: Indonesia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Peru, and Guinea. These are also priority geographies for U.S. minerals diplomacy, as we've highlighted in past episodes. But to remain competitive, Washington will need to move faster and at greater scale. China's early and substantial BRI commitments have already secured it a dominant position in the mining sector in each of these countries. To counter the soft power and strategic infrastructure gains of the BRI, the United States must reorient towards a bold, large-scale investment strategy in mineral-rich nations. A flagship PGI project is the Lobito Corridor in Africa. Backed by the United States, the European Union, and partners like the African Development Bank, the corridor will link the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia, two of the world's largest copper and cobalt producers, to Angola's Atlantic port at Lobito. These landlocked mineral giants will have a western export route that bypasses Chinese-dominated logistics networks in East Africa. When completed, the Lobito Corridor will link Angola, Zambia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo directly to global markets via the port of Lobito, providing a faster and more cost-efficient route for exporting copper, cobalt, rare earths, lithium, and other critical minerals to the United States and Europe. The project involves modernizing and extending a 1,289-kilometer rail line, building roughly 350 miles of new track in Zambia, and developing the supporting infrastructure needed along the route and at the port of Lobito's mining terminal. By creating a reliable westward export channel to counter China's eastward channel, it will help lower transportation costs, reduce supply chain disruptions, and strengthen competitiveness for mining companies across the region. Construction is slated to begin in 2026. What's important is that it's not just an infrastructure project. It's a strategic minerals diplomacy effort in action. By investing in the Lobito Corridor, PGI is reshaping the geography of global minerals trade, offering African producers new options for export and positioning the United States and its allies as long-term partners in their economic growth. It's also worth noting that the Lobito Corridor has received significant bipartisan support by both the Biden and Trump administrations. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome Helaina Matza, former acting special coordinator for the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, where she played a leading role in advancing initiatives such as the Lobito Corridor. She now serves as the Chief Strategic Development Officer at TechMet, a company in which the U.S. Development Finance Corporation holds an equity stake. We're also privileged to count her as a Senior Non-Resident Fellow with the CSIS Critical Mineral Security Program, and I'm lucky to call her a friend. Helaina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Gracelin, thank you for having me.
Helaina, let's get started. You led incredible work under PGI in spearheading the Lobito Corridor effort. How is PGI changing the game compared to the Belt and Road Initiative?
Yeah, so PGI was really designed, as you said, to be the affirmative agenda approach to how we look at infrastructure and investment around the world, especially in low and medium income countries. So there's a couple ways that PGI, I think, was designed that really sets it apart. One, it's not just the United States leading the show, right? It's the full G7, as well as multilateral development banks, not only as part of the G7 network, but on the continents we work in. In the case of Africa, that was the Africa Finance Corporation, as well as the AFDB, the African Development Bank. And so that's a really important part of the formula. The other piece is, it's really designed to crowd in private investment. And that's not like a gimmicky line. It's designed to work with private investors at the table. And that's important for a couple of reasons, but namely, many of the countries that these investments are happening in cannot handle any more debt on their balance sheet. So having a private entity at the table on day one is a huge piece of how this project allows countries to take in the infrastructure investment they need as they're either restructuring other debt or as they're trying to figure out how to keep expanding their economic development opportunities. So those pieces are really important. And the last one I'll say now is it's a multi-sector approach. So this wasn't, when we talk about economic corridors, not, hey, let's just go invest in this mine or this one project, but an approach that went across multiple sectors. Projects in the digital space, clean energy space, physical infrastructure, you name it, with critical minerals often being at the center of those investments, but so many elements that touch the economic development opportunities of the host countries.
And, to that point, corridors are so important because you're not just building one mine with it. All of the mines in an area benefit from this shared infrastructure. So it creates an enabling environment for economies of scale in this, industry that has historically been hard to mobilize capital in. Now, how do you think that Lobito Corridor and PGI are redefining the way the U.S. and our allies are doing minerals diplomacy?
It's a great question, and it's so interesting because the theory was we need to think of ways to invest in the sectors that are important to those countries. And what we realized was often commodities served as the best foundation to do that. Near or commercial investments as they stand allowed us to think really differently about other concessional finance opportunities. And that allowed us to go and invest in infrastructure further downstream, whether that was the rails that were moving those minerals or those ports that ultimately allowed for those evacuation routes. But in turn, it became so much more. The Lobito Corridor is a perfect example, right? Very early in that project, what we saw was Angolan food producers actually starting to move products into DRC, bringing more regional trade. And so those pieces are really important. Mineral diplomacy isn't just about getting minerals where you want to, although it's important. Investment, development should have a connection to national security. And I think that's part of what's helped the longevity of PGI, especially in the United States. But you're able to tie to those economic development opportunities other sectors that may have seemed ancillary, but ultimately hugely important for economic development. I think that's the future of mineral diplomacy.
What role will the Lobito Corridor and PGI more broadly play in an era of rising global competition? I mean, in the case of Africa, we saw from the map earlier that you have different pieces of infrastructure going to different sides based on where the minerals are going. How do we see Lobito Corridor playing a role in this era?
Yeah, so look, part of showing up in this way is also offering our partners, in this case, DRC, Zambia, Angola, an opportunity to demand something more. It's very easy for the United States and other countries to say, let's take time, let's build that enabling framework, let's do those regulatory reforms, and one day that investment will come from the private sector. And that's really hard. They need infrastructure today, they need investment today. And I think, that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So when you start investing in large-scale infrastructure, that means that those countries can say, we want this Chinese investment or other countries' investment also to have the same open access, transparency, maybe do additional investments around mine sites. But you have to bring the other options to the table to be able to give countries a chance to be able to really ask and demand that other type of support. And so I look at it as, if we raise the bar, anyone should be able to work with anybody as long as we're holding on to the same standards. And I think that's an important piece of the economic competition story. The other piece is we need to ensure for the West that we're securing resilient supply chains and optionalities for ourselves. So whether it's a Western-facing evacuation route for minerals, a stronger partnership with the continent in general, which will pay dividends, and I think has been a huge part of the success that this administration has taken, moving not only further on elements of Lobito, but the work that they're doing on the DRC-Rwanda peace process will just have additional opportunities for not only the mineral sector, but beyond. So I think all of these are really important elements to think through when we're talking about not only economic competition, but wanting more partners on side with the West.
Now, Helaina, how do we put our money where our mouth is? Like, this is expensive. And one of the things the United States is getting better at now is showing up and aligning our financial tools, our diplomatic mechanisms with our long-term strategic goals. How do institutions like the Development Finance Corporation, Export-Import Bank, how do we use all of these strategically to create this enabling environment for infrastructure?
Yeah, it's an amazing question, right? And I think there's a couple things we've learned through PGI, and that, as you said, we're seeing in some ways supercharged now by the new administration and their approach to use financing in really creative ways, and to also be willing to look at transactions in the context of national security. So a couple pieces. One, I think saying strategically, this is where we want to go. How do we bring the full USG toolkit to this region, to this issue, to this sector, to this national security concern? Seems like that's not so innovative, but it actually is. When we bring our XM tools, our DFC tools, our TDA tools, where we do grants and technical assistance and focus them on mutually supporting projects, you get so much more bang for your buck, and you're able to crowd in that private sector investment way faster. And I have to say, obviously, I'm no longer with the US government. I sit, at a company now, TechMet, who does have a large DFC equity investment. And so I'm seeing these issues from the other side. And I see how much working with the government has done not just to help finance our efforts to secure Western supply chains, but to help us crowd in more financing. So that tool is incredibly important, and how we deploy it really matters.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked a lot about the importance of it, how we can execute it, but what do you think some of the risks are that could undermine PGI and particularly the Lobito Corridor?
Yeah, another great question. In the case of Lobito Corridor, I think the biggest challenge we face is always around momentum, right? There was a lot of work done early on, a lot of initial finance brought to the table, and now a lot is on the private sector to carry through. And I have been very heartened to see a lot of continued political support, but that's what really need to watch out for. These projects take a long time to build, to keep the momentum and energy around infrastructure projects that, while in this case are all in different stages of development, but still some will take 10 years to be realized, is going to be the biggest challenge. But I think it is totally surmountable. In the case of PGI more broadly, I think that, it all comes down to the theory of the case, right? Each PGI partner implements PGI a bit differently. The United States has, and we'll see moving forward, really focus on this economic corridor concept. And you and I have had this discussion many times. I have become a true convert believer that investing in the whole ecosystem around the mining sector, in either direction that you look at it, is the path to success. That takes a lot of focused energy. So let's hope a version of the economic corridor model continues on.
And what's amazing too is, we've talked a lot about the ongoing negotiations on the regional economic integration framework between the DRC and Rwanda, where the US has played a very active hand. And, we talk a lot about critical minerals, but we're starting to talk about the idea of mining plus, which is mining and then the associated energy and transportation corridors. And we realize there is no minerals security without that entire ecosystem. So in a way, the Lobito Corridor was like looking ahead and has actually been really crucial in where we are now with this agreement.
It's so funny you say that. Just yesterday, another project now in my new hat that we're looking at is seeing if there's ways to support work in Ukraine moving forward, right? And how we can participate in the US-Ukraine Reconstruction Fund and participate in the PSA process that's going on for Dobra, but ultimately other minerals over time. And there was a small group yesterday that was talking about all the other types of investments that need to happen. And we were joking, is there like a Lobito corridor for Ukraine? I'm not putting anyone on the hook for that. But I do think the thinking has permeated that the relationships between those investments isn't just a feel-good economic development gain, but a real hardening resilience and security of every one of those individual investments when they're grouped together, and better for the livelihoods and ultimately the longevity of those projects.
And from the economics of the project, right? Expecting a mining company to come in and already, an investment that can easily be $500 million, and then to have to build the energy and the water and the transportation is completely commercially unpalatable. So it to make a project more commercially viable, you need to start to get some of this enabling architecture in place.
I think that's right. And look, what we're seeing happening in the DRC right now, in Zambia, in the mining area jurisdictions around the Lobito Corridor, which I should note, the initial Lobito Corridor investments, which were about $5 billion mobilized, 0 of those initial dollars went directly to a mining project. Yet, what did we see in that 2 to 3 year period of the project being deployed? We saw US investors in Zambia. We've seen so much renewed interest, and we hope ultimately more investments in DRC, in the mining sector directly. So not every project has to be this mega economic corridor, but what we see is the private sector does come behind these types of investments as long as there feels like there is a commitment, not just from the countries that are helping finance it, but the countries that are implementing. And I think part of Lobito Corridor's success is the commitment of the Lobito Corridor countries. Zambia has done a lot of work and is still doing a lot of work to continue to make their mining sector attractive, but also protect the investments that have come on the ground. And the part of the Greenfield Rail that will go through Zambia actually might be quite a bit longer than the 300 kilometers you mentioned, but closer to 800 kilometers of rail and infrastructure that the Zambian government is going to have a huge role in helping to bring online. Similar in Angola, just at the conference that was hosted a few months ago, the Angolans announced that they're using their own sovereign wealth fund to help deploy close to $1 billion on the corridor. So
Mm-hmm.
All these things coming together really matter.
So I have two questions left. So
Okay.
one is, what can we learn from Lobito Corridor in terms of what we take forward to future PGI projects in Latin America and Asia?
No, I think about this a lot, even if it's not my day job anymore. And, PGI has launched a corridor in Asia, right? The Luzon corridor in the Philippines. I believe there's still a lot of scoping going on in South America. And, I'm going to go back to some of the principles I mentioned before. I think it's really, really important that there are multiple funders at the table, whether that's G7, G7+, that they're working directly with the private sector on the front end, and that there is continent or country level investment and support at the table. That formula, for probably some obvious reasons and some reasons that aren't as clear, really creates a space that gains trust of the private sector, that there's a real investment opportunity there. And I'll say it over and over again, whether it's a formal economic corridor or not, the multi-sectoral investments really matter. We saw that in Luzon in the Philippines also. It may not be the mining sector right at the center of those projects, but the work that's happening in Subic, the work that's happening with ADB on the rail, all of that is helping to support the semicon industry, right? So there's a relationship there between commodities or national security imperative development or manufacturing with the associated infrastructure that I think is the winning formula for PGI-like projects.
Absolutely. Now, if you can sum up in one line what we learned from the Lobito Corridor and how its impact on minerals diplomacy is going forward, what would it be?
I don't think I've ever said anything in one sentence in my life, but I will really, really try. I think the Lobito Corridor shows us that there are truly mutually beneficial win-win solutions in this space that support economic development, that help serve the national security objectives of all your partners, and that can really bring lasting change.
Absolutely. Helaina, thank you so much for joining us today. And with that brings us to the end of this episode of Mapping Minerals Diplomacy. In future episodes, we'll explore how other countries are shaping their minerals diplomacy strategies and how the United States can better deploy its tools to compete. Thanks for watching. I'm Gracelin Baskaran. See you next time on Mapping Minerals Diplomacy.